Hello and welcome to EDHREC's Upping the Average, where we take a commander's average deck list as compiled by the data on EDHREC and make some quick swaps to it to help take it from being a good start to a great one. This week, we're discussing the enigmatic Aminatou the Fateshifter. Aminatou the Fateshifter is a 3-mana Esper Planeswalker with 3 starting loyalty. She can +1 to draw a card and then put a card from hand back on top of the library, -1 to blink target permanent we own, exiling it and then immediately returning it to the battlefield, and -6 to choose a direction and force each player to shift control of all of their non-land permanents in that direction, though naturally this excludes herself. Her page is full of cards we want to blink, not to mention cards that help us blink things even more, plus a few choice cards we specifically want to set up on top of the deck. One of the initially difficult things to do with an Aminatou deck is to decide how it is that you want to balance her blink ability versus her top deck setup ability. You can certainly sculpt the deck to have really cool payoffs in either category, but in our particular case, we're going to be basically going with the flow, and the majority of what we're seeing here in the average list is a lot of stuff that we want to blink multiple times to get additional enter the battlefield triggers. Alright, let's load up Aminatou's average deck list into the Architect deck building website, and remember, any swaps that we make must either be cost neutral or help lower the price of the overall deck list. Blink and you might miss it. Aminatou doesn't just have power over her own fate, but everyone else's too. We have some delightful blink targets here, from the hilarious Reality Acid to some really awesome enter the battlefield creatures. There are also a handful of cards that Aminatou can put on top of her deck to set up for a really big miracle in the future. Let's tackle this deck list in the following 3 ways: budget, control, and blink. First up, budget. Aminatou has seen our future, and she would like to remind us here in the present that we don't need extremely pricey cards to make an extremely powerful deck. She already has the powerful part covered. As always, we're going up with the average, but down with the price. $30 tutors? Peace out. I know it can be a real wrench watching someone take some of these awesome cards out of a deck, but it's an even bigger wrench for players who are trying to get started with a deck like this to see $30 price tags on individual cards, and for them to be made to feel like they're supposed to have cards like that to make the deck better. You aren't supposed to have any card in a deck, just the ones that you want to play, so you don't have to spend this much money on individual pieces of cardboard to make this deck work. Speaking of which, Rhystic Study just got a reprint in Jumpstart too, but that barely even counts. Let's not assume everyone has these. Same goes for you, Sensei's Top. Fascinating though you may be, there are other places players can put their money that will produce victory more reliably and help lay the groundwork for a more powerful deck, and most of those cards cost 100th of these price tags. The last budget cuts are going to be the Teferis. The new Teferi is actually really great, but if you want a Walker friend in this list, Venser should be your first focus. Teferi presents very clever defense in a multiplayer game, and not only that, he can draw cards on other players' turns if Aminatou has put a miracle spell on top of the deck. Since that will be the first card drawn that turn, it can therefore be miracled. This is really cool, but we're gonna take a more critical look at some of those miracle cards later, so we're fine chopping this guy for budget right now. The more complicated cut is the 3-drop Teferi. He has really cool abilities, but the most important one is stopping our opponents from interfering at instant speed. So I know we've only just gotten started, but this is as good a time as any to bring up the fact that Aminatou's a pretty mean combo machine. Blink decks always have this potential for combo. Deadeye Navigator with Peregrine Drake is a really famous combo, and both of them show up in the average list. But Aminatou herself is actually a pretty big combo piece too. Felidar Guardian is the classic example. Aminatou can blink the Guardian, which means the Guardian can blink Aminatou, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. The same goes for Spark Double. It can become a non-legendary Aminatou, and they can blink each other as much as they want. Pair it with Oath of Teferi, and they can each blink something else in addition to blinking each other, so you can get infinite enter the battlefield triggers for any permanent. This is actually why we see cards like Altar of the Brood and Corpse Knight in the average list too. They're ways to make those infinite ETBs lethal. All of this leads us back to Teferi 3. He's important for the combo line in the deck, if you want to make sure that no one can mess with you on the turn you go off. If you're doing combo, this is a really great way to fortify it, and I won't fault anyone for playing it. Lord knows Teferi did a number on constructed formats, so if you want to emulate that in a commander game, power to ya. However, I am going to recommend taking him out of the average deck, even though I am leaving the combo cards in the average deck. I know combo isn't everyone's jam, so I feel like this point kind of requires some clarification. For one thing, I don't even know if it's possible to remove all those combo cards from the deck anyway. They're woven pretty deep into the fabric of the Blink deck, and to remove them would also be to remove some of the most fun cards from the deck that makes Aminatou so appealing in the first place. For another, Aminatou is pretty controlling. She thrives in a long game, but sometimes decks like that can occasionally still struggle to actually close things out after they've stabilized against the rest of the board. It can take a while for the game to finally end. So combo, I don't mind if it speeds that part up. It means we finally get to shuffle up and play a new game. So the path that I see going forward with this deck is basically not to assume that it's always planning on using combo in every single game, because that's not how I perceive the average Aminatou player to be planning to win every single one of their games either. Rather, it is a clever deck that has a lot of really cool engines and powerful synergies that can combo off if the need arises. I feel like the players who are running combo with Aminatou already know exactly what they're doing and exactly why they want to have this card, but for folks who are getting started with Aminatou, the combo is probably going to be more incidental than primary win condition in every single instance. So to that end, Teferi is probably not the first place that we want to be putting our money. Also, he's like over $10. I probably could have just gone with the short version and said that. Why am I cutting him? Budget reasons. All right, it's time for us to move on. Let's get to part 2, control. Remember how I said Aminatou is pretty controlling? Well, the art of a control deck isn't just in its value engines, but also in how it uses its removal. Prepare yourselves, because this is going to be a big section. I've made no secret about my dislike for Utter End and Return to Dust in past videos. 4 mana is tough for single target removal at instant speed. I feel like Mortify has gotten a bit clumsy in recent years, but I'd rather have some budget removal in this deck, so I'm gonna chop Anguished Unmaking here too. I'm tossing in cheaper spells instead, Pongify and Reality Shift in particular. Also, Path to Exile was just reprinted, so it's like as cheap as it's ever gonna get, so get these while you can. I feel like this might be my only opportunity to put Path to Exile into one of these videos. I also really feel like the cheap removal aspect needs to be emphasized here. Aminatou wants us to play something on our turn and then blink it. I'm prioritizing low-cost removal here because of that play pattern. Casting a creature we want to blink shouldn't rob us of the opportunity to also cast an instant on someone else's turn. Cheap instants let us cast blinkable permanents and hold up answers on other players' turns. Another fun bit here, though, is that we don't need to just rely on spells to remove pesky permanents. Let's get some blinkable buddies in here. Act of Authority helps us repeatedly exile any problematic artifacts and enchantments over and over. And Reflector Mage is way more annoying than it looks, and it already looks really annoying. I have 3 more additions I want to make, but before I get there, I'm cutting Banishing Stroke. What is this guy thinking, right? Why would you cut a miracle? Miracles are literally part of Aminatou's specialty. Well, yeah, but hear me out. This card has a mana cost of 6, but we never intend to pay that. It has a miracle cost of 1 mana, which is much better. However, it also has a setup cost too, where we have to use Aminatou's plus ability instead of blinking something that turn. That's actually a pretty significant cost. Not only that, there's also a timing restriction on when we can even draw cards to miracle this spell. So really, a regular removal spell would just work fine in this slot instead. If our removal isn't going to be on a permanent that we can blink, it should be properly instant speed so that we can defend our Planeswalker when we need to most, which is usually during combat. So the setup cost is just too great to get a 1 mana card that can exile a problematic permanent compared to the other removal spells that can basically do that already. Alright, now to my final adds in this category. All 3 of these just feel plain nasty, and I'm almost giddy recommending them. First is Massacre Girl. She takes a full board and rips it to ribbons, ready to blink again later whenever the time arises. Next, we have Perplexing Chimera, and I already feel like I have to apologize. This card is gross, and it is so good. I've been on the receiving end of this dang thing more times than I care to admit, and it is so dang difficult to play around without giving up your best stuff, especially when the Aminatou player can just blink it right back to their control whatever they want. And finally, I'm adding in a card that I also recommended for Muldrotha players, Phyrexian Scriptures. Sagas in general are really fun to reset with Aminatou, and this particular one lets us repeatedly wipe the field while also accumulating more and more creatures that will be saved from its own wrath. This is probably my #1 recommendation for Aminatou right here. It is real fun. Alright, now it's time for our final section, blink and you'll miss it. So the obvious through line of the video so far has been that we're leaning a lot more towards Aminatou's blink ability than we are towards her ability to manipulate the top of our library. And that's really what we want to flesh out here, find more sophisticated synergies in that section. While manipulating the top of the deck is really cool, for our purposes here, it is also sufficient just to use it to sculpt our hand a little bit more and to scry or shuffle away cards that we don't need right now. Because Aminatou's most potent effects definitely occur when we harness her ability to duplicate enter the battlefield triggers. Thus, this will be a pretty mixed section. We want to discuss two things here. First, ways to increase the amount of blinking we can do, and second, improve the things we're blinking. So to get things started, this means I have to address the card Entreat the Dead. It just doesn't fit anymore in the path we're choosing here. To be honest, I'm not sure if it ever fit. Just like Banishing Stroke, this card has a lot of setup cost before it's useful. And as an avowed Reanimator player, I can't even get into the clunkiness of the steps we'd have to take to get maximum value out of this without bogging down the runtime of this video even more than I already have. This also brings me to the Delver. I don't hate it, but I don't love it here either. I don't think Aminatou is as worried about getting creatures back as these cards would imply. Almost all of the creatures we have in the deck have other redundant versions of themselves in the deck too, which means they're all kind of expendable, and we don't need to cling too hard to them. So we're okay if we look forward instead of looking back. On that note, we also gotta talk about Sun Titan. Looking over the permanents this card can hit, it's mostly lands and some mana rocks. There's like 3 creatures it can bring back, I think, which is nice, but not for 6 mana in a 3-color deck. We have better payoffs at this mana cost that we could be blinking instead. I'm just underwhelmed here. Sorry, Sun Titan. Final cuts. Portent is actually really cute, but I just don't love it as much as some of the other things that I want to add in. I guess you could say it's not all that important. And the last one is Wishclaw Talisman. I really do understand the appeal here. You use the talisman and give it away, but then blink it right back. There's even political interplay to be had here if you give it to a temporary ally. However, I have 2 problems with it. First, the political interplay whittles away as the game goes longer and longer, especially once we're down to a one-on-one. And as a control deck, we want our cards to get better over a long game, not worse. Second, and more importantly, this is a card that forces us to use Aminatou's ability. If we want to use it, we won't feel comfortable giving it away unless we know for certain that we can return it to our side as soon as possible, and that requires us to have Aminatou out. We can wait to use the effect until we do have Aminatou in play, of course, but keep in mind this is still taking up a card slot in our deck and in our hand and taking up mana to play it. That means this card has an opportunity cost in addition to the fact that it all hinges on a pretty significant timing restriction. The beauty of tutors is that they can help us out whether we're ahead or when we've fallen behind. But this is one that we almost never want to use when we're behind because it would come back to bite us in that instance. I'm not denying the card has powerful potential, but it comes with really big risks too, and it can be responsible for a lot of unforced errors. And I don't like unforced errors. Alright, now that we've made some room, let's add some stuff. I normally love Eldrazi Displacer, but you really should play this one only if you trust your colorless sources. Let's instead add in Mistmeadow Witch here, which does a really good job of it too. It's especially nice when you can use this one defensively. Conjurer's Closet is a trickier one. It was finally reprinted in Double Masters, so its price is actually quite nice right now, but there are more than just creatures we want to blink. However, since Thassa shows up in the list here, I feel like she'd enjoy the backup. Alright, now we're getting wacky. Demonic Pact is flexible and terrifying. It draws, it forces discard, it gains life and deals damage, and it can be repeatedly reset with Aminatou. Yes, it must be reset with Aminatou or else we lose the game, but it gives us a lot of time and a lot of benefit before we are forced into that corner. Oh, and if our commander ever does get into ult range, this doesn't have to be our lose the game trigger at all. Next is a classic, Gary. If you're gonna blink something in black, make it him. It's obvious, but it's also really good, and it's one of the most meaningful ways that we can push towards victory if we don't want to rely just on combo. We added Massacre Girl in earlier, so how about now we add in Massacre Worm? This is way more affordable after its reprinting in Core 21, and it is a great way to punish enemies for their hubris and keep the board clear. Getting this ability twice in a turn for a -4 gets rid of a lot of dicey creatures out there. Plus, this really punishes the very popular Aristocrat strategy. Our final card to add in is a doozy. Aminatou meet Parallax Wave. We can exile any creatures we want and they'll all return when the wave fades away. We can force that to happen sooner with our commander's ability, use this defensively to flicker enemy attacking creatures, and even double dip on some hilarious ETB effects. This card is right at home. I won't spend forever on the mana base, but again, build a mana base to your budget. If you don't have fetches and whatnot, that's fine. And here there are just a few tiny touch-ups I want to make. I'll add in a Terramorphic Expanse and an Ash Baron so that we can shuffle away things more easily if we don't like the cards that we're putting on top of the library with Aminatou's ability. The last one I'm adding is, well, it's for you players who do like combos. Piranha Marsh. It seems so innocent, but remember what happens if we have Oath of Teferi comboing off with Aminatou? We can blink the Piranha Marsh and then use our second activation to blink, say, the Felidar Cat, which will then reset Aminatou, which can then blink the Marsh and then the Cat, and then reset Aminatou and blink the Piranha Marsh again, and yeah, it's a right nasty piece of work. So there we have it. Our final deck list is in the description below with the cuts in the maybe board. I hope you've enjoyed manipulating destinies with Aminatou, and if you have any other secrets of the future that you want to share with your fellow Aminatou enthusiasts, make sure you leave them in the comments below. Now go do her proud and take fate into your own hands, and don't forget to blink a lot. Thanks so much for watching.